Chapter 2792 One Step Away? Chapter 2792 One Step Away? After the heavenly path had collapsed, modern cultivation became different from ancient times. The path of the emperors was cut off for those born after the heavenly path had collapsed. However, the Buddha of Destiny had said that the age of gods would arrive. Now that the world was changing drastically, would a new path of the emperors appear? Futian's divine tribulation was different from everything in the past. Even the great emperors present were curious. What kind of cultivation path did Futian open up? The frightening Vajra divine power transformed into a divine finger that stabbed through the sky. A beam of golden light appeared at the dome of the sky, cutting open the space. It could penetrate all force of the great path, and was about to land on Futian instantly. But then Futian glanced over. His eyes were different now. It was as if he could see through everything in the world, and the world had become more precise and slower. When one's perception became stronger, and reaction speed became faster, everything in the world would become slower in comparison. This was the situation for Futian right now. Divine power. He thought inside, what is the so-called divine power? What was the path? The path was the laws of all beings. Then what was divine power? It was the law one created for themselves. He extended a finger and pressed downward. He crashed directly against the destructive finger formed by the Vajra divine power. A muffled noise sounded throughout the void. Extremely sharp aura swept through the space, transforming into a destructive storm of divine power. It ravaged through the sky, but that destructive finger had been stopped. It did not continue forward. Futian had blocked it with the force of one finger, and it had broken apart in the space. That space seemed to have exploded. The scene was shocking. He blocked it. All the strong cultivators' hearts shuddered as they stared at the scene before them. The hearts of the cultivators of the Yi Imperial Palace were also racing. After the tribulation, Futian could withstand the Vajra realm great emperor's attack. They knew what this meant. It was surviving in a desperate situation. The 5 great emperors had come to kill Futian. They forced them into a hopeless situation, and almost had killed Futian. But at that time, the divine tribulation had come for Futian. Even most cultivators of the Yi Imperial Palace did not know what number of tribulation this was for Futian, nor did they know how exactly his cultivation status was. They only knew that he had always been in the Runhuang Plain. But what about now? Now, Futian was already the same as Heavenly Emperor Jiang and the others. If he had been one with the world before, and was a natural being, he was now an independent entity. He was independent of the world, and did not fit into the world at all. He was himself his own person. As after the divine tribulation, he was no longer restricted by the world. He existed outside the laws of this place. His life would be immortal. Even if this world were destroyed, he would still not be ruined. The great emperors of the 5 ancient god clans narrowed their eyes and stared at the figure in the sky. The 5 ancient great emperors had come for blood today, wanting to kill Futian, whom they saw as an ant. But they could not kill him. Futian was still alive, and had blocked a finger of divine power. He had already surpassed Runhuang, and come to their level, entering a complete plane. Now they probably would not be able to handle Futian anymore. Congratulations, a voice said. The human ancestor's face appeared high in the air. His actual body had not come here. This was formed by his consciousness, but the emperors might still envelop the land. He said to Futian, with this step, you broke the path and demanded from the heavens. You touched the fringe of becoming a deity, and forged your law. If you take a step forward, you'll be in line with the heavens. The strong cultivators were shocked inside, after hearing the human ancestor's words. Had Futian gone through 3 tribulations? There were 3 divine tribulations. After the 3rd tribulation, would you become a great emperor? But the human ancestor said that he had to take another step to be in line with the heavens. Could it be that Futian still lacked 1 step? Or was there another unknown secret to the so-called divine tribulations? There were only a handful of great emperors in the world. Only they knew the truth of the divine tribulations. At this time, Futian still had not figured out his cultivation state. His cultivation had always been different from the others. He had gone through 2 tribulations already, but his problems differed from the others. After 2 trials, he'd still been in the Runhuang Plain. Now after the 3rd tribulation, he could feel that he had already surpassed the Runhuang Plain. He had taken the step that he'd always been stuck at before. He had even become his own entity now. Different from the outside world, he was separate from it. He was himself. When he pointed his finger, it contained his law, or in other words, the divine power of law. However, it seemed that he still had not reached the great emperor plane. It was like he was in between the two. He had not experienced the near-God plane, but right now, he felt that his cultivation was above the near-God plane, but below the great emperor plane. He was in a type of complete state, but he could not surpass this completeness. As the human ancestor said, if he took this step, he may very well become a great emperor and be in line with the heavens. You all have the opportunity to become an emperor. Even though I don't believe in fortunes, I anticipate the age of gods that the Buddha of destiny had foretold. Let today's matter end here, the human ancestor continued to say. He seemed to want to stop today's conflict and end it here. The dark sovereign scoffed coldly, sneering inside. He was starting to believe the Buddha of destiny now. Not much remained of the 500 years of emperor fate for Donghuang the Great. There were only 30 years left, while Yi Futian had had a breakthrough at this time. It seemed to foretell something. Would the human ancestor and Donghuang the Great allow Yi Futian to take that last step and successfully get onto the path of the great emperor? And here, Yi Futian looked down at the 5 great emperors. They had come and committed the massacre. Yet now, the human ancestor said they all had the chance to become gods and wanted to end things here. But Yi Futian guessed that these 5 great emperors may have gone to the human realm. That was how they could reach this state before him. In that case, these 5 people counted as the human ancestor's partners. The human ancestor naturally did not want them to continue. Before this, Yi Futian had rejected the human ancestor's invitation. The human ancestor's words are naturally in order. Even though Yi Futian's heart was filled with murderous intent, he still spoke up and accepted the human ancestor's words. The human ancestor, Donghuang the Great, and the others were all here today. They probably would not give him the chance. Plus, his cultivation state wasn't stable, and he had not figured it out yet. He could only let them live for now. You all retreat too and cultivate well, the human ancestor said to the 5 people. They all nodded, and then their figures retreated. They gave up on the hunt and left this place. I am anticipating the age of gods, the human ancestor said, and then his face disappeared. Donghuang the Great glanced at Yi Futian and left as well. You must be careful after this, the dark sovereign reminded Yi Futian. The consciousness of the 6 emperors was left one by one. The cultivators of the other forces also retreated. The storm seemed to have ended just like this. But they all knew that Yi Futian would not let it go just like this. Plus, there were only 30-some years left of Donghuang the Great's 500-year emperor fate. Next, there would be an even more significant storm in the world. Chapter 2793 Aftermath. Chapter 2793 Aftermath. After all the strong cultivators left, Yi Futian looked toward somewhere else. It was where Shi Qiao was. He naturally knew who had helped make time for him in the last battle. If Shi Qiao had not become one with the West Emperor, he would not have survived the tribulation at all. In the distance, Shi Qiao turned her eyes and looked towards him. Yi Futian could sense that Shi Qiao's temperament was changing at that moment. Her eyes did not have the arrogance from earlier. She seemed to have returned to the past and had a bright smile. You're back, Yi Futian whispered to Shi Qiao. I came back to bid farewell. Shi Qiao smiled brightly, as if she did not mind that she was about to leave. The West Emperor had given her control of their consciousness, so she could bid farewell. Yi Futian lowered his head slightly, and sadness appeared in his eyes. He and Shi Qiao first met in a great battle. He had just gotten involved with the ancient god clans at that time. Shi Qiao did not defeat him in that battle, and thus grew curious about him. Later, the 2 clans became allies, and Shi Qiao was a good friend, though they only talked about their alliance and cultivation. However, in this critical battle, in the most hopeless time, It was Shi Qiao who had sacrificed herself to save him. Is there no other way? Yi Futian asked. If you say that, my ancestor won't even give me the chance to say goodbye anymore, Shi Qiao said while laughing. There was still a bright smile in her eyes. She and the West Emperor were either or. She had already decided, so she naturally would give way to the West Emperor. Don't be sad. When it was discovered that I was compatible with my ancestor's consciousness, my fate was already decided. It's just that today's matter moved it forward in time, Shi Qiao said, not minding it. It's worth it that it could be helpful in the most critical battle. Plus, I saved a future great emperor, the person who will rule the 7 realms someday in the future. Isn't it worth it? Shi Qiao continued to speak. Countless thoughts appeared in Yi Futian's mind, but he did not know what to say. He just felt heavy sadness. So what if he was a future great emperor, or would rule the 7 realms? She would not be able to see it. The things he lost would not be returned. I have become one with my ancestor. I will not completely disappear, Shi Qiao said. I can continue watching you move forward. Yes. Yi Futian nodded and also smiled. He did not want her to be so sad during this farewell. That day will come. You just wait. At that time, maybe you'll have a chance to come back for a visit, Yi Futian said. I promise, Shi Qiao said. Okay, I must go now. See you in the future. See you in the future. Yi Futian nodded solemnly. Then Shi Qiao's temperament changed gradually, and soon became someone else. He knew that Shi Qiao had left. The goddess of the West Imperial Palace no longer existed in the world. There was only the West Emperor. She left, the West Emperor said. Yi Futian already knew this. Looking at the West Emperor, he bowed. Thank you, Senior, for saving me. This was her choice and her last will. No need to thank me, the West Emperor said. Of all people, the West Emperor probably understood Shi Qiao the most. He had felt her thoughts and understood her intents. No matter what, it was you who acted, Yi Futian said. The West Emperor had replaced Shi Qiao. But could he resent the West Emperor? It was the other who had saved him, and this had been Shi Qiao's choice. It was her last will. But why would she do that and sacrifice herself? Yi Futian's figure went downward. Many gazes fell upon him. Of the Yi Imperial Palace cultivators, many had suffered significant injuries. It was fortunate that the 5 great emperors' target was Yi Futian, and they were dismissive towards the rest, so they had not massacred them. Otherwise, it would have been tragic. They all looked at Yi Futian. He had survived the desperate situation. Yi Futian had broken through the shackles, and this was great news. But none of them felt happy. They had suffered a catastrophe this time. Countless cultivators in the outer realms had died, turning to dust in the hands of the 5 great emperors. Return to the Yi Imperial Palace. Heal and recover. Yi Futian opened his mouth to say. Yes, Palace Lord. Everyone responded, bowing. Then Yi Futian's figure vanished. He left this place alone. The strong cultivators could feel Yi Futian's sadness, and he blamed himself. However, no one would blame Yi Futian. 5 great emperors had come for blood. What could Yi Futian have done? He still wanted to bring the 5 great emperors away from the Yi Imperial Palace at the last moment. He'd done everything he could. Plus, Yi Futian had almost died before he'd broken through the constraints. No one knew what he had experienced, but it was obvious that it wasn't as simple as what they had seen. Yi Futian returned to his cultivation court. He looked up at the Yi Imperial Palace in shambles. Even the sky above the relic had been stabbed through. There were cracks everywhere. Shi Qiao had constructed this Yi Imperial Palace, and she'd put in so much effort. Seeing the scene before him, he felt even sadder. He turned and went before the mountain. Then he sat down and closed his eyes. Instead of being sad, he had more important things to do. Cultivate. Take revenge. First, he had to figure out what his current cultivation state was. The cultivators of the Yi Imperial Palace returned eventually. They all went back to their pavilions to cultivate and recover from their injuries. Hua Jiyu's figure floated to the sky above the Yi Imperial Palace. She glanced at where Yi Futian was, but did not bother him. Instead, she said to another place, Lord. Lady. Lord Chen came over and bowed slightly in greeting. Lord, please arrange the rebuilding of the Yi Imperial Palace, Hua Jiyu said. Yes. Lord Chen nodded. Pavilion Lord Mu. Hua Jiyu then looked to Taoist monk Mu. The Taoist monk also came over to listen for orders. Please temporarily take out the pills of the alchemy pavilion, especially the healing pills, and divide them among those who are inured, Hua Jiyu said. In addition, please treat the injured. Yes, lady. Taoist monk Mu bowed and left. Masteress, is there anything we can do? Fang Siyuan and the others asked after walking towards Hua Jiyu. Yes. Hua Jiyu nodded. Her gaze turned elsewhere and fell upon a beautiful figure. However, Hua Jiyu did not call her over. Instead, she walked over to the girl. The girl also noticed Hua Jiyu, and her pretty eyes looked over. Qingyuan. Hua Jiyu had come to Xia Qingyuan's side. Yes, Xia Qingyuan responded. You are skilled in the great path of life, Hua Jiyu said. The 5 great emperors had come and committed a massacre outside. There might be many injured people. Let's go out together to look. Okay, Xia Qingyuan answered, nodding lightly. Fang Siyuan and Little Ling, you lot come with, Hua Jiyu instructed. Yes, Masteress. The group nodded. I'll go too. Hua Qingqing came over. Naturally, Hua Jiyu would not refuse her. The group headed out together. Blind Tai, Old Ma, Qin Yi, and the others followed suit. The 5 ancient god clans had already retreated, but they were still afraid and on high alert. At the same time, outside the Yi Imperial Palace, Yu Sheng had also ordered the strong cultivators of the Devil World to guard the outer regions. He guarded the sky above the Yi Imperial Palace. Meanwhile, Yi Qingyao had come inside the Yi Imperial Palace and looked to Yi Futian. There was someone else there. Ling Long quietly guarded in the near distance, but she did not disturb Yi Futian either. Yi Futian cultivated quietly and alone in the cultivation court. There was a hint of loneliness. Chapter 2794 Path of the Great Emperor. Chapter 2794 Path of the Great Emperor Cleanup. An aftermath work started both inside and outside the Yi Imperial Palace. Many people became busy. In this battle, the Yi Imperial Palace's damages were limited. The worst of the damage was outside the Yi Imperial Palace. When the 5 ancient god clans had arrived, they had turned beings into dust with just a flick of their finger. Too many people had died. Even if they were lucky not to die, they were still gravely injured. These people came from the Ziwei segmentum and 3,000 realms of the Great Path. They were all cultivators who believed in Yi Futian. The vast sky and land were immersed in sadness and anger. At this time, Hua Jiyu, Xia Qingyuan, and the others appeared somewhere. The light of life enveloped the surrounding strong cultivators, and many lotuses of life bloomed. Buddhist light also glowed to heal the injured people here. Many of the people recognized Hua Jiyu and asked, Lady, were those people from the ancient god clan reborn great emperors? Yes. Hua Jiyu nodded. Crack. They clenched their fists tightly, and furious flames of hatred jumped out. Before, they had been filled with reverence for great emperors. Those were high and mighty existences that they looked up to. But after this time, it was hatred and anger. These great emperors had butchered them, viewing their lives as weeds. They were all massacred like ants. Was this how great emperors were? Lady, the palace lord will avenge us, right? Someone asked. Even if the enemy were great emperors, they still believed that Yi Futian would take revenge. They had no hope, so they could only look to Yi Futian. Yes. Hua Jiyu nodded. Her telekinesis covered the vast space. When she discovered the injured, she used the transmission of her voice and had them come to this area to be treated. Yes. The others nodded solemnly. The flames of revenge were burning within them right now. Their palace lord must become an emperor in the future and lead them to revenge. Everyone was busy. Only Yi Futian, palace lord of the Yi Imperial Palace, cultivated in solitude. Inside the Yi Imperial Palace, Yi Futian sat with crossed legs. Strands of divine light circulated in his body, wrapping around him. It did not fit in with the qi of the world. It was like a different kind of aura. He didn't have any kind of elemental force within his body. His life palace was also empty, and the world tree had become illusory. The divine ruler had disappeared, melded into his body, flesh, and spiritual soul. It had become one with him. The elemental forces he was skilled in's word, water, fire, thunder, space, life, and more, had all disappeared. Breaking off the path meant breaking all will of the paths. It was ridding them completely, going from something to nothing, and becoming his most original self. Legends said that before the heavenly path, the world had been nothingness. It had been a turbid world, and only after that did the world birth life. The laws of the world were then created, which led to the birth of the path. Cultivators studied the world nature, the usage of the world laws, and thus controlled the path to possess greater power. An illusory item suddenly appeared in this world of nothingness. This illusory item gradually grew a face, and then a body, arms, and legs. It formed a humanoid shape. It was Yi Futian's figure that had appeared in this world. This figure was not created by Yi Futian's consciousness. It was more like the consciousness of this world of nothingness had birthed another him. He stood in the void and perceived everything there. He was thinking. This void had birthed a strand of Yi Futian's spirituality, as if representing the consciousness of this world of nothingness. Yi Futian's heart was very shocked right now. He thought of the ancient heavenly path. There had been 8 legions under the heavenly path that ruled the heavens and managed the laws of the world. The so-called laws of the world were probably the heavenly path itself. The heavenly path was the law. Since the 8 legions were under the heavenly path's rule, the heavenly path had its own consciousness. This was also why the heavenly path collapsed after a group of extraordinary figures were born and wanted to go against nature, attacking the path. They were unwilling to submit to the heavenly path, wanted to be above the path, and thus went against nature, starting the war of the gods. Then the age of the gods ended. Yi Futian fell into deep thought. In the ancient age of the gods, there had been 8 legions below the heavenly path. However, it probably had not been only the 8 legions. There must have been many great emperors on the side of the heavenly path. The heavenly path represented order. Many great emperors probably had reached their level due to the heavenly path, while those who wanted to attack the heavenly path may have taken another path. For example, Shenjia the Great had founded his own path. He'd believed that there was no path in the world, so he created his own law and order. He had billions of runes within his body. Each rune was a law or order. In a way, this was his path. If he carved the word sky, it would transform into a sky. If he carved the word sword, then it would become an indestructible way of swordsmanship. The demonic lord and others were most likely this type as well. Then what was the significance of what was happening now? It meant that he had also stepped onto this path. However, Yi Futian felt that things were not so simple. He had reached this step by coincidence. It was not because of his comprehension. There was also his life spirit, the world tree. Right now, Yi Futian guessed that the world tree was related to the heavenly path. It was a very brave guess, but the many things that had happened all pointed to this hypothesis. Thus, would another world evolve in his inner body and create another heavenly path? What kind of divine power would then appear in his world? While Yi Futian pondered, the shred of consciousness that had been born also seemed to be considering. The divine power that Donghuang the Great was skilled in was revelation. The human ancestor studied the force of mankind, which represented the way of mankind. There was also the Vajra divine power, infinite divine power, etc. What about him? Yi Futian had a feeling that he'd stepped onto a path different from everyone else. Divine power. Yi Futian murmured. Everything in the world had gone from nothing to something, from something to nothing. Now everything had been destroyed. Only the ancient tree's aura remained. Meanwhile, only one kind of divine power matched with the world tree life spirit. It was creation. If the world within his body represented a small heavenly path, he would soon create his own order. Kaboom! When this thought formed, a huge boom sounded from the world within his body. This world of nothingness shook violently, and the illusory Yi Futian swept his hand across, cutting down on the nothingness. The world of nothingness was abruptly cut into 2. The top was the sky, the bottom was the land. Strands of vitality were born from the world. One yin and one yang. They grew in the world. All of this had evolved naturally, rather than being controlled by Yi Futian's mind. It was like the natural order born from this world. From nothing to something. Yi Futian quietly observed all of these changes. In the outside world, his body had halos of divine light, and he stood out from the others. At that moment, Yi Futian seemed to have found the cultivation path for himself. Also, Yi Futian felt vaguely that this path might lead straight to the Great Emperor Plane. He had not become an emperor directly before, because this world had not been completed. Chapter 2795 A Pair of Eyes. Chapter 2795 A Pair of Eyes. Time passed without him realizing. The Yi Imperial Palace had been repaired, and the injured folks from the outer realm had recovered. But even so, the inside of the Yi Imperial Palace still seemed a bit heavy. The effect of the battle still had not scattered. The 5 great emperors had descended and killed with an undefeatable state. At that moment, everyone's eyes were taken over by despair. They would not be able to recover in a short time. As time passed, the cultivators of the Yi Imperial Palace were also improving continuously. They cultivated with even more effort, advancing themselves. Many people broke through the constraints of their planes. Yi Futian was still cultivating in isolation, and no one disturbed him. Even though Yu Sheng and Yi Qingyao had guarded him for a long time, they'd never disturbed his cultivation. That day, Yi Futian had broken through the shackles and blocked the attack from a former great emperor. Everyone had witnessed this. It meant that Yi Futian may have entered a new level, so naturally, no one would disturb his cultivation at this time. In the cultivation court, divine light flowed across Yi Futian's body. This divine light was different from the power of the outside world. It belonged to himself. And within the world inside his body, the forces of yin and yang appeared in the turbid world of nothingness. The sun and moon began to rotate. At night, when the will of yin was the strongest, even a starry sky would appear. Other than that, the wills of the 5 elements were born too, appearing in this world. The growth of this world did not operate under Yi Futian's will. It seemed to have its own law. However, the birth of everything in this world was also related to Yi Futian's will. The core of this world was creation. After the wills of the 5 elements were born, this world now had mountain ranges and rivers. Flora also came into existence, and wind would blow across the space. After creating each element, Yi Futian's aura would also change a bit. The forces born here due to fate were the law of the world. The law of this world was his own power. It was the law of his own divine power, like Shenjia the Great, who could form a sky or sword with one word. Yi Futian had broken off the path, going from something to nothing. Now he was cultivating in reverse, going from nothing to something. He had been skilled in the elemental forces of the great path. Now, he was creating it in his new world, and they were being born. In the snap of a finger, 1 year passed. During this year, the world inside Yi Futian's body had taken shape. Yin and yang combined, the sun and moon rotated, and both life and death appeared. The current life palace world had the general shape of a world, but it was still growing and completing itself. This day, the will of swordsmanship was born in one area of the world. It also transformed into a part of the world law. Thus, Yi Futian stopped his isolated cultivation. He came out without waiting for the world to continue developing. He vaguely felt that he could complete some things now. He did not want to wait longer. When Yi Futian's figure appeared above the Yi Imperial Palace, Hua Jiyu came over. She could feel that Yi Futian was different from before, but she couldn't pinpoint how exactly he was different. The West Emperor's figure also appeared in the near distance, and he gazed at Yi Futian. He felt a bit threatened by Yi Futian right now. Even though Yi Futian did not release any aura, his natural sensitivity helped him sense danger. Jiyu, I'm going out, Yi Futian said to Hua Jiyu. Okay. Hua Jiyu nodded. Naturally, she would not stop Yi Futian. Senior, please help watch over the Yi Imperial Palace, Yi Futian said to the West Emperor. Seeing that face, he would think of Shi Qiyao. Even though her temperament had changed greatly, no problem. The West Emperor nodded, agreeing to it. Yi Futian bowed his head slightly, and then his figure floated forward. He vanished in a blink, heading out of the Yi Imperial Palace. The West Emperor looked at Yi Futian's backside, and a strange look appeared in his eyes. He had an idea of what Yi Futian was going to do. Yi Futian had not cultivated in isolation for too long right now. In fact, one could say this period had been very short. He could have continued to improve himself. But with Yi Futian's cultivation state right now, He seemed like he could not wait to do something. Of course, there was only one thing that Futian wanted to do right now: take revenge. The God's Ruins continent was now connected to all the realms. Naturally, many passages led to the Divine Prefecture. After the world changed drastically, the space seemed to have changed too. He could not use that precious item anymore. But Futian could still use those passageways to easily head towards the Divine Prefecture. The Vajra realm of the Vajra domain, Divine Prefecture, was a huge territory. The present Vajra realm was now one of the strongest places of the Divine Prefecture. The Vajra realm's ancient emperor had returned. The cultivators of the Vajra realm found pride in this. At this time, cultivators went to and fro in the Vajra realm. Many of them had very strong cultivations. They followed after the Vajra realm great emperor and were confident about the future. One day, the great emperor would return completely. But just then, a group of cultivators walking in the Vajra realm looked up into the sky. They saw a figure appear high up in the sky. This man had white robes and white hair. He was very handsome and had an indescribable temperament. He stood high in the sky and could attract everyone's gazes in an instant. It was like he did not belong to this world. He was an independent entity. This kind of temperament shocked them greatly. They had felt this from their ancient emperor's body. Who is that? Some people had never seen Futian before. It's Futian, a shocked voice said. Instantly, many people's expressions changed. Futian had come murderously to the Vajra realm. In an instant, strands of strong aura exploded. Vajra divine power bloomed from their bodies. But the moment they released their auras of the great path, Futian looked down at them. The next moment, they saw the most shocking scene since they started cultivating. Futian's eyes were no longer like the eyes of a human. They saw the sun in his left eye, and the moon in his right eye. Moonlight showered down. Instantly their bodies were sealed by ice. Their consciousness had not been wiped entirely, and they tried to move, but they discovered that they'd already been sealed. The extreme coldness was the divine power of Een. No, their hearts tremored. The next moment, the divine fire of the sun shot out of Futian's other eye, shooting right onto the ice statues. The next instant, all of the ice statues disappeared from the world without a trace. It was like those cultivators had never come to the world before. The hearts of the people in the distance beat frantically. Was this still the power of a human cultivator? At that moment, a thought appeared in their minds: divine power. Futian had created his own divine power. Chapter 2796 The Hopeless Vajra Realm. Chapter 2796 The Hopeless Vajra Realm. His eyes had turned into the sun and moon, the yin and yang. The current Futian was like a true heavenly god. Run! Across the vast territory of the Vajra realm, countless people began fleeing instead of thinking of fighting. Since Futian had already formed his own divine power, it meant that he was above them now. Even the former Futian could have killed them as simply as flipping a hand, let alone the current Futian. B/B, what could they do other than run? Probably no one other than the Vajra realm great emperor could handle Futian. Seeing the cultivators of the Vajra realm escape, Futian's body abruptly became large as a giant god, blocking the sky and sun. His pair of eyes also enlarged, shooting out the light of the sun and moon. It transformed into destructive power, and everything in its path turned to dust. Seeing the people in the distance trying to escape, he opened his mouth wide and spat out divine thunder. In an instant, billions of bolts of divine lightning fell. Everything in its path was destroyed. Every cultivator that got hit was instantly killed and torn apart. They could not take a single hit. Has he already reached enlightenment and become a great emperor? Everyone was shocked inside. Everything under his line of sight was turned instantly to dust. Futian's eyes had turned into the sun and Vajra realm. He could activated the force of the great path, and he transformed into the Vajra realm domain. The Futian that they saw was into a boundless curtain of light. One could not help but wonder if he had already reached enlightenment. They tried to stop Futian, stepped onto the path of the emperors. But then they saw Futian take a step. Did not care about the guesses in their hearts. Down on the curtain of light. He stepped into the sky, and countless cracks appeared instantly. A huge footprint was hurled down. The curtain of light crumbled. He stepped onto the ground, but the big foot continued to step down. And all the Vajra realm buildings collapsed. The Vajra realm cultivators, many cultivators were stomped to death. With the force of his foot was like a divine mountain falling, God's pressing down on the earth. Top figures he stepped across the sky. They died in despair and could not fight back at all. Just like how the five ancient god clans had invaded the Yi Imperial Palace being respectful anymore. He swept across the Vajra realm was facing no one could stop disaster now. There was only continuous death. The Vajra realm fighters of the Vajra realm appeared, to the Yi and they let out wars. And now the great emperor they were paying for it. The great emperor still cultivating in isolation. The shock cries sounded in waves and carried fear. A beautiful even beam those of golden divine light shot out of a pagoda and even went through the divine tribulations of the great brilliant, illuminating the cultivators who had once attacked divine the power imperial palace with the Vajra realm great emperor. It was extremely sharp. Now felt extremely strong terror. The Vajra realm cultivators who had come for revenge this time at this moment of despair. The Vajra realm great heavenly god was their last bit of light. Futian's huge now eyes that the great emperor void in the distance. It was like he had not arrived to their last straw but his eyes could already see into the depths frightening of the Vajra divine power. His eyes shot out the light of the sun and stabbed through the pagoda. Like an indestructibly sharp blade, it shot towards Yi Futian. This finger was the finger of a heavenly god. Divine power tore through the sky. Even if Yi Futian got hit, his body would probably shatter too, right? Countless eyes were trained on that finger, hoping that it could kill Yi Futian, or at least hurt him. The heavenly god that Yi Futian had transformed into stared at the incoming finger. He did not block it. The divine finger formed by the Vajra divine power blasted onto his huge body, emitting an incredible sound. It was like metal clashing. That's suicide. Many people stared at Yi Futian. He didn't block it. But the next moment, their pupils constricted. There were no eyes that weren't trained on that place, staring at Yi Futian's godly body. That godly body only shook a bit. It did not get penetrated and shattered just as everyone had imagined. This scene extinguished the shred of hope they had just had. Despair flooded their hearts again. The Vajra divine power's murderous finger could not break through Yi Futian's body. Had his current body already become a divine form? Yi Futian looked down, glancing at the strong cultivators of the Vajra realm below. With that gaze, the power of Yin sealed everything. They could feel coldness coming from their souls. Then their bodies froze, their great path was sealed off, and they could no longer move. No! They raised their heads in despair and looked at Yi Futian. Some even started pleading to him. You have already entered the path. Why commit so much bloodshed? It was the great emperor who decided last time. We had no other choice. Now that the world had changed, their cultivations had all improved. The great emperor had returned too. So they all fantasized that they could continue advancing. Especially because the Vajra realm had reached a new peak after their ancient emperor returned. But right at this time, despair descended. Yi Futian had come murderously, transformed into a heavenly god. The so-called ancient god clan could not take a single hit. All of their heritage had become so weak before the absolute strength. It was completely meaningless. Divine sunlight shot out of Yi Futian's left eye, landing on them directly. Under the divine powers of Yin and Yang, the core figures of the Vajra realm gradually emptied, and finally turned to dust. The ashes scattered in the wind. Before this, the 5 ancient emperors had attacked the Yi Imperial Palace, making the cultivators in and out of the Yi Imperial Palace feel like ants under the great emperors. But today, Yi Futian made the strong cultivators of the Vajra realm feel the same thing. Despair, powerlessness. Facing Yi Futian, they were like ants that could be squashed to death. A single glance could turn them to dust. Bang! With a huge sound, the pagoda shattered. The Vajra realm great emperor's figure appeared. He stood in the distance, and his eyes were frightening as he stared at Yi Futian across the space. Failing to kill Yi Futian in the previous battle had left a lasting threat. He had not become a great emperor yet, but Yi Futian already had the abilities of a great emperor. His eyes had become the sun and moon. He spat out divine thunder, and his flesh body was indestructible. His body was like a true divine form. Every body part was made of divine power. Yi Futian's cultivation path was different from his. How did he do it? Chapter 2797 Battle of the Heavenly Gods. Chapter 2797 Battle of the Heavenly Gods. The Vajra Realm Great Emperor did not care that much about the lives of Vajra Realm cultivators. He was a great emperor from the ancient times, and long stopped having feelings for his current descendants. Furthermore, everything and everyone below the great emperor plane were ants. For him, the cultivators of the Vajra realm were only ants who were closer to him. He had gone to cultivate in isolation after the last battle. Yi Futian's tribulation had given him a lot of pressure. What surprised him was that Yi Futian had come out after such a short time, and was impatient about revenge. In his opinion, this was clearly unwise. Delaying your cultivation to take revenge for some ants was so stupid. Plus, Yi Futian's cultivation was significant now. He already had one step on the path of the emperors. He must be so foolish to do something like this. If it were him, he would choose to cultivate in isolation for life. In the distant era, the heavenly path controlled the world. The Vajra realm great emperor said to Yi Futian. Some followed the heavenly path. Some went against the heavenly path and broke it. They created a brilliant age of gods together. Unfortunately, the latter who broke the path wanted to change the heavens. The former also responded. At present, the world had changed drastically, and the great emperor's era has finally come. In this entirely new age, the gods have returned, and new emperors will rise. The cultivation world might welcome a new golden age, and recover the prosperity of ancient times. You've already reached this step now. It means you ride above all else, and may become one of the stars of the future. Since you're already at this position, how about you stop now? The Vajra realm great emperor wanted a truce. Below him, the countless cultivators of the Vajra realm looked at their great emperor, and had an indescribable feeling in their hearts. Shouldn't the Vajra realm great emperor act like a great emperor, and kill Yi Futian to avenge the Vajra realm cultivators? Even they could see that the Vajra realm great emperor felt unconfident. That was why he was asking for a truce. With the great emperor's personality, he would not be asking for peace and truce at this time, if he was confident in killing Yi Futian. Yi Futian had killed his way into here. The high and mighty emperor? Yi Futian said mockingly and caused an echo. Even the cultivators of the Vajra realm could see the truth. So he naturally could see that the lord of the Vajra realm was intimidated. You didn't act like this before. His voice filled the space and produced an echo with the world. At the same time, frightening divine light flowed across his body, forming the great path. The divine light of the sun and moon shot directly out of his eyes, going toward the lord of the Vajra realm. Did the possibility for truce exist between them? A sheet of light formed by Vajra divine power rose around the Vajra realm great emperor's body. Light from dazzling runes flowed across the light sheet, and divine power circulated throughout. It was indestructible. He was indeed a bit intimidated by Yi Futian. He had broken his path, and even succeeded. In that era, far fewer great emperors had gone against the great path, rather than following it. They had a higher death rate, and they might not be stronger than those who followed the great path. However, the supernatural beings who could stand at the peak were usually from that group. They broke the great path, and created their own path. In the current age, the great path had collapsed, and the path of the emperors was broken. Yet Yi Futian had successfully broken his path. His body was now a divine form, his flesh was the path. His eyes had turned into the sun-moon, and he spat out divine thunder. Yi Futian would be extraordinary even in that ancient age. The divine light of the sun and moon fell upon the Vajra realm light curtain. The powers of yin and yang instantly covered that domain. The defensive curtain was getting eaten away at, but the defenses formed by divine power did not shatter directly. After all, he was a former great emperor. Below, the cultivators of the Vajra realm all looked up at the battle in the sky. This battle would determine their fates. Yi Futian opened his mouth, and his divine form spat out divine thunder. It transformed into the force of divine punishment, hitting the curtain of light squarely. A crack appeared in the Vajra divine power. The yin and yang had already been eating away at the defenses. After the divine thunder landed, the light curtain fell apart instantly. The destructive attack continued advancing, going murderously towards the Vajra realm great emperor. But at that time, a frightening beam of divine light shot out of his eyes. In that instant, many divine monuments appeared in the sky. It was like the Vajra divine power had formed divine monuments that shielded before him, high up in the sky or across the world. They were everywhere. They had not unleashed their strongest abilities in the battle against the Yi Imperial Palace. "Go," he uttered in a cold voice. Instantly, the divine monuments everywhere went towards Yi Futian's body from all directions. They were fast as lightning. The divine power monuments were about to transform into a Vajra realm cell to imprison Yi Futian. A muffled sound came from the dome of the sky. Countless people looked up at the sky and gazed at that shocking scene. Every divine monument was humongous. They joined from 8 directions, and even the yin yang and divine thunder couldn't destroy them in an instant. If the divine monuments closed in, it would form a world prison. Yi Futian scanned them with his eyes. Instead of dodging them, he stepped into the sky. The world roared and transformed into a heavenly god. He crashed straight into the divine monument before him. Boom! There was a terrifying boom, as if the world was splitting apart. The huge divine monument before Yi Futian shattered from Yi Futian's divine form crashing into it. The divine monuments still came for him from different directions. A huge golden staff appeared in Yi Futian's hand. It had been formed by the divine power in his body. Wham! The golden divine staff twirled, and staff silhouettes swept across the sky. Bam, bam, bam. All of the monuments constructed by Vajra divine power were blasted apart. They couldn't fend off the attack of a divine form. But right then, an even more prominent figure of a golden heavenly god appeared before Yi Futian. It was the Vajra realm Great Emperor's transformation. Divine light flowed across that huge body, and the Vajra divine power was pushed to the max. Supreme might covered the vast land, causing the people below to fall to the ground. Was this a true heavenly god? Yi Futian, you and I will both become emperors. Must we determine who will die or live today? The Vajra realm divine lord's gaze swept towards Yi Futian. His voice was thick and powerful, echoing throughout the dome of the sky. It was only a voice, but many of the top cultivators below were shaken up. Blood seeped from their eardrums. The light formed by the Vajra divine power radiated in the sky, and also shone on Yi Futian's body. It emanated a very sharp aura. However, he was completely unmoved. His eyes continued shooting at the other like the sun and moon, and his body continued to enlarge. He kept growing, making the hearts of the cultivators below pound heavily. "It's you who will die," Yi Futian uttered coldly. This battle was not to determine who would die or live. It was to make the other die. Arrogant. When the Vajra realm Great Emperor spoke, countless beams of divine light shot out. The Vajra divine power transformed into billions of golden spears that dove towards Yi Futian. Yi Futian's eyes shone with divine light. Moonlight showered down, and under the power of Yin, time and space seemed to come to a standstill. Frost covered the endless golden spears, and their speed slowed down. At the same time, Yi Futian attacked again. There was a huge divine sword materializing in his hand. Chapter 2798 Destruction. Chapter 2798 Destruction. Yi Futian had transformed into a heavenly god. He held the divine sword, and moonlight showered down. The divine power of Yin sealed the vast space. The golden spears formed by the Vajra divine power were all covered in frost, and their speed was affected too. Yi Futian took a step forward, and instantly stabbed the boundless divine sword out. The entire world seemed to fall apart abruptly. The space was about to be torn apart. All of the Vajra divine power spears in the divine sword's path broke apart. Under the divine power of Yin, these spears seemed to have weakened a lot. The Vajra realm Great Power used his mind, and golden divine light instantly enveloped the vast space. This area had become the Vajra realm. Countless beams of golden light shone onto his body. He reached out a huge hand, and the light filling the sky landed on his fingers. The next moment he pointed, attacking Yi Futian's incoming divine sword. The Tianqian's point. Countless eyes watched the shocking scene in the dome of the sky. The two huge gods were like gods of war. Even though they hadn't fully broken into the Emperor realm, the battle before their eyes were like an actual war between gods. With that finger, the world grew colorless. Golden divine light shone through vast land, and the space in its path was destroyed. That finger seemed to want to divide the world into two. The sky was halved. At his peak, the single point of the Vajra realm Great Emperor could penetrate an entire continent. Two extremely frightening attacks zoomed through the sky, and then converged. They crashed together. Instantly, the space was almost torn apart. A destructive windstorm swept across the land. This attack was like a competition between their divine powers. There was a muffled sound. The Tianqian's point formed by Vajra divine power was crumbling. The divine power collapsed, making the observing cultivators' hearts beat furiously. Was he about to lose? The Vajra realm great emperor's pupils constricted. Yi Futian stood on the world, and his eyes shone with divine light that covered the Vajra realm great emperor's body. He wanted to seal the heavenly god's figure with ice. At the same time, his arms continued forward. The divine sword killed its way over and shattered the Tianqian's point. Countless beams of divine light burst from the Vajra realm great emperor's body and blocked the divine power of Yin. At the same time, he put his hands together. His palms formed a sealed space of divine power and snatched the divine sword. But then his arms and palms were invaded by the divine power of Yin. The power of Yin could weaken the sturdiest thing in the world. Thus, even Vajra divine power was significantly weakened under the power of Yin. There was a huge boom, and the divine sword stabbed through the palm fiercely. It continued forward along the heavenly arm, continuing to shatter it. The Vajra realm great emperor's expression changed drastically. He'd actually lost. Boom. Taking a step in the air, his body shot towards the higher altitude. But how could Yi Futian give him that chance? Even though the divine power of Yin could not seal him directly, it still affected his speed. At the same time, Yi Futian's speed increased. That extremely huge divine figure moved like the wind. The current Yi Futian himself was created by the path. He had constructed his own world. He could be the sun, could be the moon, could be thunder and lightning, and could be the wind. Poof poof. There were sharp noises. The Vajra realm great emperor transformed into the divine light and shot into the air. However, Yi Futian carried the divine sword and charged towards the other, stabbing his arm through. Then he attacked directly onto the heavenly god's body. Bang! There was a low sound, and the divine body shook violently. Then yin yang and thunder rained down at once. The Vajra divine power could not protect his body, and the divine sword stabbed through it, breaking into it and directly penetrating the huge divine body. Paired with the huge sound, the heavenly god's body broke apart. Just then, countless beams of divine light shot out simultaneously towards different directions. Some divine light even shot towards Yi Futian's eyes. Yi Futian did not hide from it at all. The sun and moon were reflected in his huge eyes, and he spat out lightning. The horrifying divine power shrouded the sky, sealing it off. Instantly, the divine light shooting in all directions was blocked too. You still want to escape? His cold voice resounded through the void. His eyes swept across the space. The huge body of the heavenly god was shattering like crazy, disappearing continuously. All of the divine light that tried to escape were blocked and destroyed by the divine powers of Yin and Yang. Yi Futian, countless voices said. It was the Vajra realm great emperor's voice that came from different directions. The divine light seemed to contain his consciousness. You and I both cultivated to this point. Why must you eradicate me? If you need help, I'll do anything you ask. If you want to improve, I can give you advice too. The voice sounded a bit panicked. It was clear that the Vajra realm great emperor was scared. He had survived for countless years, and was finally reborn now. He had waited for countless years but would die here today. You're not qualified. Yi Futian's baritone voice sounded throughout the sky. His divine power continued sweeping across, killing every remnant of consciousness. He didn't let any shred of aura go and wiped it all out. Yi Futian. It was a panicked roar. A silhouette of the Vajra realm great emperor appeared. But Yi Futian did not care. His eyes swept across, and the divine light of the sun burned it directly, not showing any mercy. This sweeping lasted for a very long time. Yi Futian did not give the other any chance at all. He destroyed that place completely until everything had turned to dust, and not a single crumb of the Vajra realm great emperor was left. The other had existed from ancient times until now. How could he give the other a chance to come again? The people below kept staring up at the sky, and their hearts pounded furiously. They had witnessed Yi Futian eradicate the Vajra realm great emperor with their own eyes. This terrified them. He was too cruel. going to the extreme, and not giving the other a sliver of hope. A returned great emperor, who had not fully recovered to their peak, had died here, killed by Yi Futian. The Vajra realm great emperor was the first to live until now, and yet get killed. After killing the Vajra realm great emperor, Yi Futian's gaze swept down. Terrifying divine light shot out of his eyes, covering the entire vast Vajra realm. In an instant, the Vajra realm turned to dust under the divine fire of the sun. Everything was turned to ash and ceased to exist. From now on, the Vajra realm of the ancient god clan had become history. Yet another of the 6 ancient god clans of the divine prefecture had turned to dust. And compared to Tianyan City, the Vajra realm's destruction was even more complete. It had been reduced to ashes. After completing all this, Yi Futian's figure flashed and disappeared. Countless eyes watched him leave. Their hearts were still pounding. Was Yi Futian going for the next ancient god clan? There had been 5 ancient god clans that participated in the battle at the Yi Imperial Palace. Chapter 2799 Prepared Ahead. Chapter 2799 Prepared Ahead. The second ancient god clan that Yi Futian visited was the Haotian clan. Haotian clan was located in the Nantian domain, which was different from the Vajra region. However, with Yi Futian's cultivation nowadays, it didn't take long for him to traverse large expanses of territories. As the ancient power of the ancient god clans that resided in the divine prefecture, Haotian clan in Nantian domain had countless years of history and wielded unparalleled influence in Nantian domain. The main city where the Haotian clan was located was also known as the premier city in Nantian domain. What happened? At this time, many people in the city were talking about it. Not long ago, there was a lot of commotion inside the Haotian clan about gathering the cultivators inside the clan. Then news came out that the cultivators of the Haotian clan were evacuating. No idea what's going on. It looks like they are preparing to face a major enemy. But what kind of enemy can threaten the Haotian clan? Someone responded. Currently, the Haotian clan was under the command of Haotian the Great. Who could instill such fear in them? Perhaps it's because of God's continent, someone said. Everyone knew about God's continent by now, and many top cultivators had gone there to cultivate, shuttling between the divine prefecture and the God's continent. They all knew there were too many terrifying cultivators at that place. I heard that a major war had broken out on the God's continent previously, and 5 of the ancient god clans had joined forces to attack Yi Futian, and almost managed to kill him too. However, after that war, Yi Futian survived the divine tribulation, and he may have undergone a certain transformation after that. Do you think it might be him? Ask someone who had heard about that battle. I've also heard about it. That might be the case. There was a lot of information going around inside the city, and everything stemmed from the recent changes taking place in Haotian clan, which attracted many people's interest. Just as all the cultivators in the city were talking and guessing, high above the sky, a figure traveled through the air and came to this main city, heading straight to the place where the Haotian clan was located. Some cultivators traveling in the air saw Yi Futian and couldn't help but show a look of surprise. Many people had shuttled past him from below. That's odd. Someone turned around and looked that way. Then their eyes sharpened, fixed on that speeding figure. It's Yi Futian, someone exclaimed. He's here in Haotian City. What is he going to? When they thought of the previous changes in Haotian clan, they all realized something and began turning around and walking the other way. Soon, a special kind of news began spreading inside Haotian City. The changes that took place in the Haotian clan were because of Yi Futian, who had come to slaughter them. This news was quickly causing a great sensation, spreading at lightning speed. Countless cultivators rushed in the direction of the Haotian clan. It seemed that the Haotian clan of today was indeed very fearful of Yi Futian. At the same time the news had spread, Yi Futian had already arrived in Haotian clan. Looking at the ancient god clan that towered into the sky before him, Yi Futian's eyes were cold and indifferent. He looked at the gigantic Haotian divine monument in the area below, and suddenly the monument was shrouded in the power of Yin. It disintegrated into a pile of dust. In the distance, The hearts of those outside of the Haotian clan trembled violently when they beheld this scene. Someone had destroyed the divine monument of the Haotian clan. An even more shocking scene appeared in the next moment. Several horrific auras descended upon this space, right inside the Haotian clan. Yi Futian did not seem surprised and acted as he normally would. Many years ago, when he and the 6 ancient god clans had first had their grievances, these 6 ancient god clans had allied and exchanged information. He had destroyed the Vajra region and slain their great emperor. How could the other ancient god clans not know about such major news? Moreover, they knew his target, so they had rushed over here. Among the 6 ancient god clans, Tianyan City and the Vajra region had both been destroyed. Now there were only 4 other ancient god clans remaining. It was unsurprising that they would join forces, especially now that Yi Futian had killed the great emperor of the Vajra region. The 4 great emperors appeared in different positions, and from them, 4 terrifying auras suppressed this space, shocking the cultivators from the distance of Haotian City to no ends. It turned out that the changes inside Haotian clan were because of Yi Futian. To deal with him, the great emperors of the 4 ancient god clans showed up here simultaneously. Was today's Yi Futian so scary? These 4 great emperors from the ancient times surged with divine power, and there was no longer the contempt they once had in their eyes when they invaded inside Yi Imperial Palace. There was more of wariness in their eyes now because, after all, one of them had already died by Yi Futian's hands. Yi Futian glanced at the 4 great emperors and did not speak. The powerful divine light surged upon his body as he then held up both of his hands. Suddenly, massive stars appeared and completely covered the sky. The people who were watching the battle from afar looked horrified as the sky above their heads dimmed. The cultivators from Haotian City were trembling with fear. Then they saw Yi Futian's hands fell down. In an instant, the stars suspended in the sky above the Haotian clan fell towards the ground below, to bury the Haotian clan completely, thus sending it into history. Haotian the Great's face changed slightly as he suddenly released a supreme power. Instantly, a divine force manifested to support this corner of the sky. Boom, boom, boom. Terrifying loud sounds were heard as the gigantic and boundless heavenly bodies fell down. However, they were blocked by the divine power of Haotian and hung in midair. Yi Futian's eyes glanced that way, and his eyes turned into the sun and the moon. The shadow and solar divine power shot directly at Haotian the Great. Haotian the Great raised both hands abruptly slapped towards the sky above, blasting out the divine seal of Haotian. Suddenly, the stars right above them exploded and shattered. Haotian the Great slammed his palms forward again, turning it into a divine wall, blocking off the invading shadow and solar divine powers. The other 3 great emperors resisted the stars falling from the firmament. They would either try to prop them up, or directly attack with divine power to smash them. Yi Futian turned his eyes and swept towards the Haotian clan below. The divine fire of the sun came down, and in just an instant, the vast Haotian clan below was ignited by the divine flames, which turned into ashes right away. Different places continued to burn, and in just a short moment, the divine fire of the sun had covered the entire Haotian clan. Fortunately, the cultivators of Haotian clan have already evacuated. Many cultivators from Haotian City secretly marveled. The truth was that they could not have stopped Yi Futian. As soon as the divine fire of the sun descended, any cultivators in the vicinity were killed. But though its people had left, Haotian clan was no more, as it was burned to the ground. Yi Futian. At this moment, a strong voice came from above the sky. It was as if it had penetrated through the void. Then, rays of divine light descended from the sky, like space passages piercing the void. The golden divine light descended, and some people came walking out of the golden passageway. Everyone had an astonishing aura, which was beyond terrifying. Many cultivators in Haotian City closed their eyes. The divine light was simply too blinding. Yi Futian's eyes fixed on the other side, watching those cultivators descending. He saw several familiar faces, like the princess of the divine prefecture, Donghuang Diyuan. Beside him was Li Daoshou, who was known as the strongest person in Donghuang Imperial Palace in the divine prefecture. However, this time, None of the people who came out of the golden passageways were weaker than Li Daoshou. These were people who might be the hidden source of power in Donghuang Imperial Palace. Yi Futian didn't feel that it was anything strange. Such a group of cultivators had existed in the human realm. So it was not that surprising that the same might be true of the Divine Prefecture. Once Donghuang the Great had unified the Divine Prefecture, there would be old monster-level figures who submitted under his command and cultivated under him. Donghuang Imperial Palace has arrived. The cultivators in Haoyan City secretly marveled that Yi Futian's strength had alarmed even Donghuang Imperial Palace. Chapter 2800 Submit. Chapter 2800 Submit. Donghuang Diyuan glanced in Yi Futian's direction. Not the slightest emotion could be seen in her eyes, except coldness. She didn't speak, but merely turned her attention to Haoyan the Great and the other 3 great emperors. She said, "Will the 4 ancient god clans submit to Donghuang Imperial Palace?" What? Everyone in Haoyan City looked surprised. What did Donghuang Diyuan mean by this? Was she asking the 4 great emperors from the 4 ancient god clans whether they would submit to her, Donghuang Diyuan? Or was she asking if the 4 ancient god clans would obey the orders and the commands of Donghuang Imperial Palace? They didn't understand, but the 4 great emperors understood, and Yi Futian too understood. He had guessed before that the 5 great emperors of the 5 ancient god clans may have gone to the human realm to cultivate, but the human ancestor wanted to stage a double cross. More importantly, the Divine Prefecture had no jurisdiction over them, so that it couldn't do anything about it. After all, the ancient god clans were only residing in the territories belonging to the Divine Prefecture. Still, they were not forces under the command of Donghuang Imperial Palace then. Donghuang the Great was not in a position to force them to do anything, or else he would have gone against his own will and became the same as the Dark World. However, this time they were threatened by Yi Futian, and it was at a time like this that Donghuang Diyuan asked this crucial question. They could say they would not submit, but Donghuang Diyuan and the forces belonging to Donghuang Imperial Palace could stand by and watch. If they answered yes to the question, from now on, they would be under the rule of Donghuang the Great, who would also command them. Above the firmament, the divine light was shining brilliantly. Those extremely splendid spatial passageways were still there, and Donghuang Diyuan was even more magnificent than she was once upon a time. One question from her is to ask the 4 great emperors to choose. The 4 great emperors did not make a reply. If they agreed, it would be the same as obeying Donghuang Imperial Palace. Then, if any of them dared to be a traitor, Donghuang the Great could intervene to execute them, and they would have nothing to say for themselves, not even the human ancestor. The operation of this world still followed some basic principles, unless someone had the absolute power to break them. Yi Futian understood that Donghuang Diyuan had her ideas about things as well. His figure grew greater, turning into a god from heaven again. He stretched out his hands as a massive divine rod appeared in it. This rod was golden in color, and seemed to be engraved with the brilliance of the stars. Even if it simply fell by itself, it was enough to crush everything under the sky. Buzz! Yi Futian's body moved forward, and that godlike torso was making its way along with the divine rod in his hand, shooting straight towards Haoyan the Great. Haoyan the Great's gaze sharpened. He saw Yi Futian's speed increase, and that body of God directly rushed at him as the divine rod came smashing down. That gigantic and massive divine rod danced in Yi Futian's hand, as if it was extremely light and nimble. However, when it blasted out, a sound of the sonic boom could be heard throughout the void, as if the space was exploding, and that the heaven and the earth were about to be pulverized. The cultivators standing in the faraway Haoyan City felt a heavy pressure when they saw the swings of the rod. Haoyan the Great raised his hand and reached out. Suddenly, a terrifying Haoyan divine power was held within his palm. A massive divine imprint blasted out, like a blow from the heaven itself, which was equally ponderous. When these 2 horrific attacks collided, the sky and earth crumbled, and the void was thoroughly shaken. A destructive storm swept out, and numerous cracks appeared upon the Haoyan divine seal, as it then began to shatter. It was being blasted apart by the gigantic divine rod, as the terrifying storm continued to exert its coercion. Futian the Great was feeling a mighty pressure at this moment. Yi Futian's attack was enough to crush his divine power. But when Yi Futian attacked Futian the Great, the other three great emperors also took action. Heavenly Emperor Jiang held the golden divine halberd and turned it into a beam of light. The destructive divine halberd broke through the void and descended, attacking Yi Futian's body of a god. At this time, Yi Futian's body was humongous, which meant he was also a massive target. When this devastating blow found its target, it would probably pierce through his flesh. Wuxia the Great unleashed countless divine swords. As Yuanshi the Great mobilized the power of God punishment somewhere over Yi Futian. In an instant, attacks of mass destruction directly submerged that corner of heaven and earth, ready to bury Yi Futian in those destructive attacks. Boom! Yi Futian's body erupted with an incomparable aura. Having morphed into a deity, every hair on his head had stood up and turned into a sharp sword to resist the onslaught of God-punishing power. His skin turned into the hardest rock in the world, as millions of divine swords and divine halberds landed upon it, but failed to break open his body. When Yi Futian took that step, his body was no longer a mortal body of flesh and blood. It was a body of a deity, a real divine body. Unparalleled rays of light erupted from that body, as the divine power of Yin froze those millions of divine swords and halberds instantly. Yi Futian's body as a deity danced with the divine rod, accompanied by loud rumbling sounds. Heaven and earth roared, and countless attacks exploded and shattered. The sky was filled with the shadows of the rod strikes, as these strikes smashed at the four great emperors simultaneously. The four great emperors released their attacks at the same time to defend themselves. The shadows of the rod covered the entire sky, and each strike contained supreme divine power that was enough to smash the void and shatter the firmament. At the same time, the divine glory of shadow/solar sprinkled down and covered the boundless space, but it targeted Futian the Great in particular. Yi Futian was going to deal with one person at a time and get rid of them one by one. The cultivators in Futian City were shocked when they witnessed this battle. An invincible flesh. Not only did Yi Futian's eyes turn into the sun and the moon, with thunder spat out of his mouth, his hair had also turned into sharp swords, and his skin turned into stars and rocks. What kind of monster was this? Aside from the cultivators from Futian City, even the cultivators from the Donghuang Imperial Palace were trembling in their hearts when they saw Yi Futian at this moment. Today's Yi Futian was far too strong, as if he was a god descending upon this world. His power was enough to uproot the mountains, with the peerless dominance of someone who could not be defeated. Bang! A loud noise came out, and Futian the Great was blasted into flying out. With a grunt, he could feel his internal organs were shaking. He raised his head to stare at Yi Futian. When those infinite strikes of the rods came down, he felt as if endless stars had fallen, and that corner of the sky came clapping down, containing an unparalleled power. It was a power that even Futian divine power could not withstand. How could such a monster be created? With a flicker of his form, he flew higher into the sky. With a thought, the vast world became his world. His figure disappeared as he merged into this world, turned to part of the vast sky, and became one with it. An overwhelming pressure descended and landed squarely on Yi Futian. Yi Futian glanced at this corner of the sky with contempt, as the sun and the moon hovered above, and the divine power of shadow and solar shrouded this space. Immediately, the space was covered with frost, yet still burning with the sacred flames, followed by the divine thunders, as one attack after another was unleashed continuously. The divine rod in Yi Futian's hand waved again, ready to attack. However, the vast heaven disappeared at this moment, and Futian the Great retreated into the distance. He didn't dare to continue his transformation as the vast heaven, as it was only a matter of time before it was going to be smashed by Yi Futian. Futian clan is willing to submit under the jurisdiction of Donghuang Imperial Palace. Futian the Great raised his head and said to Donghuang Diyuan in the sky. He finally admitted defeat. Chapter 28:01 Deep Meaning? Chapter 28:01 Deep Meaning? Haotian the Great had compromised and bowed his head, surrendering himself to Donghuang Imperial Palace. As soon as this statement was made, it meant that from this moment forward, the Haotian clan was under the jurisdiction of Donghuang Imperial Palace, giving Donghuang Imperial Palace the right over Haotian clan and Haotian the Great. The cultivators in Haotian City looked at that godlike figure. They thought they could have never predicted that one battle with Yi Futian would result in Haotian the Great submitting to Donghuang Imperial Palace. Haotian the Great was extremely wary of Yi Futian. Did this mean that the great emperors who had once attacked Yi Futian in his territory were now no longer able to contend with him? That legendary young man had defeated the mighty existences from ancient times. Yi Futian frowned slightly. He understood that Donghuang Diyuan wanted to force the four great emperors to surrender. But was it enough to stop him? He was a little reluctant, even if this was their territory. The sky was full of the waving shadows of the rod, as Yi Futian never ceased to attack. He slaughtered in the direction of Haotian the Great. But at this moment, an extremely radiant divine light descended from the sky. A tyrannical storm of divine power overwhelmed the area where he was. In this storm, all the powers of the Great Path were imprisoned, as if there could not be the existence of any other rule's power. Yi Futian's power of shadow/solar was being obstructed, and the strikes of the rod were becoming slower. He raised his head to look at Donghuang Diyuan, only to see rays of beaming light falling from her. Those rays of light were from the revelation divine power. This time, Donghuang Diyuan seemed to have transformed into an empress, stronger than she ever was before. Obviously, she had not squandered all these years either because she had undergone a great transformation. Boom! Yi Futian stepped forcefully forward. Even though the revelation divine power was extraordinary, it could not definitively limit Yi Futian in any way. So he continued to move forward, and the attacks of destruction did not stop. When Donghuang Diyuan saw this, she released the revelation divine power to its extreme. At the same time, all around Donghuang Diyuan, divine power surged upon the top cultivators from the divine prefecture, and they were descending in Yi Futian's direction. Yi Futian, my father didn't kill you because of the past, but it doesn't mean that you can act with such insolence in the land of the divine prefecture. Donghuang Diyuan chided him coldly, and her voice resounded throughout the void. When her voice faded, a top cultivator next to her walked out with imperial arms in hand. It was a boundless and massive god-silencing bell, from which a terrifying divine power permeated. Especially under the urging of this man's divine power, the might of the imperial arms was incredibly awesome. Boom! Shocking sounds came out, and the god-silencing bell shot out rounds after rounds of divine light, and each round of divine light turned into a vast divine bell to smash down upon Yi Futian, wanting to bury him. Yi Futian raised his head and glanced at them. Then the divine power of Yin was unleashed. Shadows of the bells that descended from the void were blocked by ice, making it difficult to continue its forward momentum. Then, the imperial arms descended, carrying the supreme divine might to aim for the kill. Its power covered a vast space, intending to bury Yi Futian once and for all. The divine rod swung by Yi Futian slashed upward into the sky above, and the shadows of the rod filled the sky. The clanging sounds were deafening as the rod in Yi Futian's hand flew out. It grew continuously, and became more extraordinary, until it blasted inside the god-silencing bell. Clang! A terrifying sound came out, and an unparalleled storm of destruction erupted from the god-silencing bell. The imperial arms were repelled and knocked out. Likewise, the divine rod had also returned to Yi Futian's hands. Under joint attacks, Yi Futian's attack on Haotian the Great was thwarted. The three of you make a choice. If you don't want to surrender, Donghuang Imperial Palace will not force you to. Feel free to make your own decisions, Donghuang Diyuan said. Her voice rang throughout the void. She was talking to Yuanshi the Great, Wuliang the Great, and Heavenly Emperor Jiang. Heavenly Emperor Jiang and the others stared at Yi Futian. The truth was that he could have left when Yi Futian was battling just now. All he needed to do was open a spatial door with his extraordinary strength. And he could have left, but he didn't. Even if he left, what else could he do? He wouldn't be able to gain a foothold in the divine prefecture. and he would be hunted by Yi Futian forever. Or to seek refuge in the human realm. The human ancestor meant to buy their loyalty and make them submit to him. But it wasn't so easy. It was said that Dong Huang the Great was a peerless figure in this era. He was also the person who cut through the path before Yi Futian to become an emperor. In ancient times, Dong Huang the Great would be a super cultivator who went against the natural order of the world. Therefore, he would like to learn something from Dong Huang the Great. I would be willing to enter Dong Huang Imperial Palace, Heavenly Emperor Jiang said. And his answer was very decisive. The world was unpredictable. There was no friendship in this world, only self-interest. For them, everything had only one purpose. And that was to prove the way again and set foot on the thrones they had held in years past. Everything could be sacrificed for this purpose. How could the other two not understand Heavenly Emperor Jiang's thinking? Yuanshi the Great was heard saying, I have always admired Dong Huang the Great, and I have always wanted to request an audience. I am willing as well, Wuxia the Great said also. The four great emperors expressed their positions one after another. They were great emperors returning to the ancient god clans. They had allied because their goal was the same, so it helped to keep the same position as allies, which would be suitable for them in the end. After all, this was not their era anymore, and they should make the best of it for the time being. Everything else could wait when they reached the imperial realm. Dong Huang Diyuan glanced at the ancient emperors below, and her expression was still icy cold. Then her eyes drifted once again to Yi Futian and said, You can go, and if you come back again in the divine prefecture, it will not be like this time. Yi Futian stared at the Dong Huang Diyuan. Even though numerous cultivators were in front of him, he didn't think he could be defeated. Nowadays, his defense was nearly invincible, and hardly anyone under the great emperors could touch him. Even these few ancient emperors could not have done so. Nevertheless, this was the divine prefecture, the territory of Dong Huang the Great. Since Dong Huang Diyuan had arrived, and Dong Huang Imperial Palace got itself involved, this meant that there was not much hope for now. This time, he was destined not to be able to kill the remaining great emperors. The sun and the moon disappeared from his eyes, but Yi Futian looked as calm as could be. With a smile, he looked at Dong Huang Diyuan and said, The princess is even more beautiful after such a long absence. If there is ever an opportunity, I would like to catch up with the princess alone. He turned around and stepped into the void in a single step. Dong Huang Diyuan's beautiful eyes stared at Yi Futian's departing figure, and no one could fathom what she was thinking. The others, however, could not be certain if there were any deep meanings behind Yi Futian's parting words. The Vajra region has been destroyed, and from now on, if there is no order from Dong Huang Imperial Palace, please don't move around at will. Dong Huang Diyuan cast a final glance at the few men in the area below, before leading her people back to the golden passageway. Heavenly Emperor Jiang and the others frowned, showing a look of puzzlement. Dong Huang the Great did not plan on summoning them? What was the meaning of this? They thought Dong Huang the Great would ask Dong Huang Diyuan to take them to Dong Huang Imperial Palace. Chapter 2802 Path of the Emperors? Chapter 2802 Path of the Emperors? After Yi Futian returned to Yi Imperial Palace, he continued cultivating in retreat. He had only managed to destroy the Vajra region out of the 5 ancient god clans on this outing. For now, he was unable to extinguish the other 4 ancient god clans like he wanted to. However, once he was able to step onto the path of emperors, it would only be a matter of time before he got rid of them. The evolution of the world inside his body was far from completion. In addition, the elemental powers that he created were also in their most rudimentary form, which meant that his strength had not yet reached its peak. He could combine the elemental powers to create an even stronger rule power, which the outside world called divine power. Still, no one disturbed Yi Futian's cultivation. Everyone in Yi Imperial Palace knew that Yi Futian was at a crucial point at this very moment. Soon after, news spread from the divine prefecture to the continent of ruins, and eventually made its way inside Yi Imperial Palace. The news was that Yi Futian had slayed the great emperor of the Vajra region, and destroyed the Vajra region single-handedly. He had even gone to Haotian clan for the express purpose of erasing the Haotian clan's base. It was only when he battled the 4 ancient emperors that Donghuang Imperial Palace intervened, and Yi Futian was forced to back off. After the news of this battle came out, countless cultivators on God's continent were shocked beyond words. Could Yi Futian already have the ability to kill someone like the ancient emperors? Although those great emperors had not yet returned to their former glory, they were, after all, great emperors themselves once. Had Yi Futian crossed the divine realm in that battle and broke the shackles? Had he already embarked on the path of emperors? There was news from the divine prefecture that today's Yi Futian was akin to a great emperor himself. Like a deity, his eyes could be turned into the sun and the moon, and his mouth could spit out thunders. One step of his foot was like a mountain that came down for the kill, and his skin was as indestructible as stars and rocks. His physical body had been enlightened and became a veritable divine body. Even the powerful great emperors from ancient times could not sack their defenses. After the news spread, there were many more exaggerated rumors. It was said that Yi Futian now had 3 heads and 6 arms, and he was already on the path of the emperors and would soon become an emperor himself. The cultivators of Yi Imperial Palace were a little speechless regarding these rumors that began circling, but they were also full of expectations for Yi Futian. He had gone to kill the great emperor of the Vajra region by himself in the divine prefecture. Just where in his cultivation had he progressed to now? Everyone was looking forward to when Yi Futian would come out of retreat again. How far was he from becoming a great emperor? No one disturbed Yi Futian's cultivation, and the people in Yi Imperial Palace were also working very hard. None of them wanted to fall too far behind. One after another, more and more cultivators began to emerge. However, Yi Futian was unaware of all the changes that took place in the outside world, but continued to immerse himself in his cultivation. In the inner world of his body, it no longer resembled an inner space, but looked more like a real world. In addition to the rising and setting of the sun and the moon, there were also mountains, rivers, and lush vegetation. There was only one figure in this world, and it was Yi Futian. This was not Yi Futian himself, but the will born out of this world, representing the will of this space. He stood high above the sky, looking at the entire world that was constantly in the process of being created. When the sun and the moon rotate, there are rotations between life and death, Yi Futian muttered to himself. Hence, the living things born in this world began to experience the cycle of life and death, and gradually developed their own rules of survival, which allowed life to flourish, as well as to wither and die. His body flew high in the void, and came to a corner of his own world, which was still relatively barren. Yi Futian looked at all this, and then looked at the sky above. This one glance had taken a long time, gone through many rotations of the moon and the sun. The rotation of the sun and the moon, the alternation of life and death, creation and destruction means that everything in the world had 2 polarities accompany each other, Yi Futian secretly said in his heart, as he observed and comprehended this world. After many days, currents of destruction began manifesting in this empty space. A sea appeared in the area below, which contained various storms of destruction to symbolize death and destruction. Even the flames are more than just one kind of flame. There is Yang, the most aggressive divine solar fire. And there is also the Yin fire, Yi Futian said to himself again. He was bringing all of his perceptions of the world to this space, to start a creation that would give birth to the rules power of this world and perfect them. After a long time, Yi Futian created many elemental rules. He returned to the void, sat cross-legged, and fell into deep meditation. If he was creating the world, what was the meaning of the heavenly path back then? What did the 8 legions under the heavenly path represent? They were in charge of the world's order on behalf of the heavenly path. Was the power they controlled given by the heavenly path as well? With a thought, Yi Futian appeared in the area below, leaning on a tree. This towering tree seemed to be morphed by the ancient tree of the world, and it was a part of this world. Yi Futian leaned against the tree and looked up into the sky, watching the sun and the moon rising and setting, and the days passed. Here, it seemed that there was no such concept as time. The sun and the moon turn into a day. The time I experienced here is the same as the one on the outside. Since this is the world of my own making, does it mean that I can change the movement of time as well? Futian thought. It was an incredibly bold idea. Time itself was no more than an arbitrary construct. Did it exist in absolute terms? But if one were to try to make the time different from it, perhaps it would still be rather challenging. Futian just sat there like that day after day, watching the alternation between the sun and the moon. There was no time limitation in cultivation, and Futian had cultivated to yet another level. Time passed incredibly fast for him, and the outside world was changing every day. There were more and more cultivators who emerged daily, and recently, terribly shocking news had been going around, spreading to every corner of the world. People in Yi Imperial Palace had gotten the news as well. At this moment, many of them had gathered together to discuss whether or not to interrupt Yi Futian's cultivation. Let the madam decide, Lord Chen proposed as he looked at Hua Jiyu, who was coming over this way. It was better to ask Hua Jiyu to decide. I'll go tell him, Hua Jiyu responded. This is not a trivial matter. It was best to let Yi Futian know. Everyone nodded. Then Hua Jiyu came to Yi Futian's place of cultivation, and walked not far from him. Behind her, the little condor had delivered a message to Yi Futian. Suddenly, Yi Futian opened his eyes, looked towards Hua Jiyu, and smiled softly. Jiyu. Hua Jiyu walked over next to Yi Futian and sat down, saying, A lot has happened in the outside world these past few years. You have been cultivating without interruption. But there is some news not long ago that may cause many people in the Imperial Palace to want to go out and investigate for themselves. Yi Futian was stunned for a moment, a little surprised. He was not worried about someone eavesdropping on their conversations. What's going on? Yi Futian asked. It is rumored that in the Heavenly Emperor realm, the path of the emperors had appeared, and the cultivators from everywhere have rushed over to check it out, said Hua Jiyu. Yi Futian understood. Did the path of the emperors appear? If so, it was expected for the cultivators from Yi Imperial Palace to want to go there themselves. Heavenly Emperor Realm, a world in decline, was once a prosperous domain in the past. Now the path of the emperors had shown itself. Two people came to Yi Futian's mind immediately. One was that extremely enchanted genius talent, the heir of the Heavenly Emperor Realm, Ji Wudao, who seized the ruins of the old heaven court and obtained its inheritance. This man was a bewitching existence. Two people came to Yi Futian's mind immediately. One was that extremely enchanted genius talent, the heir of the Heavenly Emperor Realm, Ji Wudao, who seized the ruins of the old heaven court and obtained its inheritance. This man was a bewitching existence. In addition, there was another person, the unparalleled existence, that Supreme Sword Lord, said to be the daughter of the Emperor, incomparable from past to present. The world would lose much color without her. She, who was the daughter of the Heavenly Emperor, was also the cultivator who commanded the Heaven Realm in later eras. Was she still around? There were 7 realms today, but only 6 emperors were known. Among them, Heaven Realm's presence was almost unknown. That legendary unparalleled figure seemed to be a forbidden existence, with hardly anyone ever mentioning her. Was Ji Wudao a disciple of hers? More importantly, Yi Futian had a feeling that this person must have occupied a pivotal position in the past, and may have been involved in many secrets. Very possibly, she was the key to many things. The path of the emperors has materialized. Naturally, I have to go and take a look, Yi Futian said. In the times after the collapse of the heavenly path, there was no path of the emperor to be found. In order to become a great emperor, in addition to having unparalleled talent, one also needed some extraordinary chance. However, Yi Futian still had no idea what kind of opportunity would be. But now, the path of the emperor's sudden appearance may be part of the puzzle. He was not the only one in Yi Imperial Palace, as there were many other cultivators. For example, the West Emperor who had returned, the cultivators from West Imperial Palace, the cultivators from Lost Clan, as well as the many people around him. All of them would be going through that step in the future. They all wanted to go see, and Yi Futian would not miss it either. In fact, Now that he had transformed, it was easy for the others to fear him, so he should not be out and about. However, there was an agreement between the 6 emperors, and under the circumstances, the cultivators from the 6 realms may be present, which meant that all 6 emperors may also be there for the occasion. As such, his safety was ensured. Under the great emperor, many desired to kill him, including those returning emperors of the ancient god clans. However, with his current cultivation and strength, very few below the grade of the great emperor could actually manage to hurt him. Yi Futian and Hua Jiu got up and walked outside with the little condor following closely behind. They came to the front of the great hall, and everyone was waiting for them there already. When they saw Yi Futian, everyone bowed and saluted, calling out, "Palace Lord." They found that Yi Futian's temperament had changed again. Currently, Yi Futian already possessed a trace of temperament that could only belong to the great emperors. This temperament was hard to quantify or describe, but as soon as he stood before them, he seemed to be the only one in this world. They knew then that Yi Futian had already embarked on his path of the emperors. Even those well acquainted with Yi Futian, such as Lord Chun, had submitted to Yi Futian once upon a time because they valued Yi Futian's potential and his position as the heir of Ziwei the Great. They may be polite to each other, but their respect was not coming from the heart. But it was different now. Everyone in Yi Imperial Palace had changed their attitude towards Yi Futian. This change was not intentional, but an invisible progression. All of it was because Yi Futian's strength had reached another level, and in the future, he was destined to become a great emperor himself. Since the path of the emperors has appeared, people who had cultivated to the peak of Renhuang and above, prepare to leave if you want to come, and you can go with me, Yi Futian said to everyone. In truth, there was no other preparation that was needed. In other words, they had been ready and could leave at any time. When Yi Futian saw everyone was looking in his direction, he understood what they were thinking. He stepped forward and stood in front of the main hall. Looking at Yi Imperial Palace down below, he said loudly, "While I am out, I will seal off Yi Imperial Palace after I leave. Everyone will have to work a little harder during this time, and focus on cultivating inside Yi Imperial Palace." "Palace Lord, we understand. Palace Lord, go in peace. We will be fine." Voices spoke up one after another, responding to reassure Yi Futian. Yi Futian wanted to seal off Yi Imperial Palace for its safety, and they understood this very well. Very well. Yi Futian's mind turned slightly. Immediately, divine power spread out from him, extending towards Yi Imperial Palace. In just a moment, his rule's divine power had enveloped the entire Yi Imperial Palace, leaving just an opening. "Let's go." Yi Futian took a group of cultivators and left. Once they walked out of Yi Imperial Palace, Yi Futian sealed the opening behind him, and suddenly, the vast Yi Imperial Palace was like a cocoon, shrouded by the divine light, and formed a world of its own. It was so indestructible that even the likes of Haotian the Great would be hard-pressed to get through it. Compared with the other 6 realms, the Heavenly Emperor realm did not seem to have a strong presence. However, after the great changes in the world, the Heaven realm had also opened up a space passage, which could be used directly to commute from the Heavenly Emperor realm to the original realm. Cultivators of the Heavenly Emperor realm would also follow the space passage to come here to cultivate. Of course, compared to the land of the 6 realms, the Heavenly Emperor realm did not open up many passages. Nonetheless, a few had been uncovered. Yi Futian and the others followed a space passageway and came to the Heaven realm from the original realm. They were stunned when they arrived in the Heaven realm. When they looked up into the sky, Yi Futian was quite surprised to find that above them, there was nothing but a chaotic space. There was no firmament above the Heaven realm. What happened in the Heaven realm back then? They moved in one direction with incredible speed, traveling in the air. There was no firmament above the Heaven realm, but there were land masses on the ground. These continents were full of ancient atmosphere, and many buildings on the continents were buildings from ancient times. They encountered many other continents of ruins that had barely any traces of inhabitants as they moved along. What happened to the Heaven realm before? Yi Futian whispered, Just looking at everything in front of him, he could feel that many years ago, the heaven realm must have experienced a terrifying battle for this to occur. As far as he knew, the heaven realm was once extremely prosperous. In the era of the heavenly emperor, the heaven realm was once a supreme realm, surpassing all other realms. But for what reason had it become so? Many cultivators in the heaven realm have migrated elsewhere. It is said that they have gone to other realms. For example, cultivators in today's heaven realm were said to be the least among the 7 realms, Supreme Swordlord explained. They had seen a few well-to-do continents on their way, and saw many cultivators there. However, compared to the prosperity of the mainland in the Divine Prefecture, there was still quite a gap. Even in the Devil World and the Dark World, the number of cultivators was far greater than the heaven realm. However, they didn't pay much attention to this. Their purpose this time was not to observe the heaven realm, but to go where the path of the emperors had manifested, which was also the ruins of the former heavenly palace. After they had inquired about the location, they focused on getting to their destination. On the way, they met many other cultivators who were going in the same direction. Many of them were cultivators from the heavenly emperor realm, but many came from the ruins continent from all parts of the world. The unveiling of the path of the emperors was a shocking news to the entire 7 realms. The cultivators from the 7 realms who were on the ruins continent rushed over after hearing the news. When they were moving upward into the sky, Yi Futian's divine consciousness scanned over many areas of the heavenly palace. The land of the heavenly palace was incredibly vast. Even his divine consciousness could only cover part of the area. He saw many cultivation courts and buildings that dated back to ancient times. They were impressive and splendid, and most of them were pure white and extremely clean-looking. But most of them had suffered some damage. What kind of battle happened in the heavenly palace back then? Yi Futian's heart palpitated. Did the battle of the great emperors shatter the heavenly palace? However, he also saw a lot of cultivators at the heavenly palace, who must be people from the heavenly imperial palace of today. These people, led by Ji Wudao, kept a low profile in the outside world. But in the battle at the old heaven court, the heavenly imperial palace demonstrated extraordinary combat effectiveness. Ji Wudao, great Skylords Black and White Almighty, the 4 heavenly kings, and the 9 star lords were notable figures. More importantly, it was still unknown whether more powerful existences were hidden within this heavenly palace. Yi Futian and the others passed through layers of heaven, and there seemed to be no end to the heavenly palace. They continued upward without encountering any obstacles. When they got to the 90th layer of heaven, they could feel a heavenly might that came from the sky, as the sky stairwell was also coming to an end. But their pace did not slow, as they continued moving through the sky, continued making their way upwards, and passing through layer after layer. If this were in the era of the heavenly emperor, anyone who dared to come through that last 9 layers of heaven would be automatically executed and punished by heaven. In the last 9 heavens, Yi Futian saw many examples of ancient architecture, which had been repaired and maintained. These buildings and the cultivation courts were filled with powerful aura, as they were the residences of mighty cultivators in the heaven realm today. But at this time there was no one around. Everyone must have reached the very top. As they continued upward, the heavenly might was becoming stronger as well. When they finally reached the 99th heaven, a heavenly palace towering high above them, the heavenly might was coming from above the palace, and the aura that came from it was enough to make Yi Futian's heart beat wildly. Not just Yi Futian, but everyone around him felt it as well. An extremely sharp will flashed through their eyes. Perfect will. Yi Futian fixed his attention on the sky in front of him. It was the most primitive kind of will. There were cultivators from all over the world in this world, and the top figures of the 7 realms had arrived at different positions. In addition, there were top cultivators from various worlds, including Haotian the Great, whom Yi Futian intended on killing before, as well as other inheritors of ancient emperors from the other worlds. All of them had come under this sky. At this time, many cultivators had also noticed Yi Futian's arrival. After all, Futian was way too dazzling in existence today. Although no great emperor was backing him, he was nonetheless one of the top existences in the known world, a supreme cultivator who had slain the ancient emperor. After the news of the battle came out, it sent shockwaves throughout the 7 realms, but Futian never emerged again after that. He had been cultivating in retreat ever since, until his presence under the heaven today. The cultivators from the Heavenly Imperial Palace stood above the Heavenly Palace, and Wuxia was among them. His temperament was extraordinary, and had changed quite a bit compared to what it was in the past. He glanced at Futian. Almost everyone who should be here was here. Futian felt these gazes upon him. He glanced in all directions, and saw many people were cultivating. There were divine powers that circulated upon those top figures. Today, just after a few years, everyone was improving and transforming. Moreover, this firmament may be able to help them in their cultivation. Above the firmament, the sky seemed to be nurturing a terrifying aura of the great path. From this sky, Futian could sense a familiar aura that he had experienced many times before. An aura possessed only by some divine items. Take Wuxia Watchtower, for example. Wuxia Watchtower was an immensely powerful divine item, but the hands of the Millet Emperor had truly excavated it. There was also the Divine Ruler, which was also of similar aura. Heavenly Path. Futian's eyes were extremely sharp, as he felt the aura of the firmament, and his heart was greatly troubled. After the collapse of the Heavenly Path, some divine items had come to the world, which was left by the Heavenly Path. According to legend, Wuxia Watchtower was the gate to the Heavenly Path. However, the Heavenly Path had collapsed, so this could not be the Heavenly Path here in its totality. Therefore, only one possibility was that this was part of the Heavenly Path. In this corner of the sky in the Heavenly Imperial Palace, there was a part of the Heavenly Path. What could it possibly mean? Could it be related to the destructive attacks that Heavenly Realm had suffered back then? Many secrets may have a direct connection with the Heavenly Imperial Palace. Futian even had a faint suspicion that perhaps his existence had something to do with the Heavenly Imperial Palace. Path of the Emperors, Futian murmured. The era before the collapse of the Heavenly Path was the era of the gods. If this was part of the Heavenly Path, then this here was indeed the path of the Emperors. Divine Relic! Came an exclamation from Futian's side. The person who spoke was the West Emperor. He looked at the sky in front of him, and even as a former ancient emperor, he still couldn't hide the shock he felt. Divine Relic! Came an exclamation from Futian's side. The person who spoke was the West Emperor. He looked at the sky in front of him, and even as a former ancient emperor, he still couldn't hide the shock he felt. Futian looked at the West Emperor and asked, "Is there a chance for people to step on the path of the emperors and enter the imperial realm?" "Yes, there is." The West Emperor nodded emphatically. "If I just woke up, perhaps I would have thought that the Heavenly Path had not yet collapsed, and that we were still in that era. Whoever created this seemed to have transformed it into the Heavenly Path." "It was man-made?" Futian asked in astonishment. "If it weren't man-made, would it be the Heavenly Path itself? That would be impossible." The West Emperor shook his head. "This is definitely a miracle. In that era, how did cultivators step onto the path of emperors?" Futian asked. He had a former great emperor by his side, but he had been too busy with his cultivation in the past few years, and had never had a serious conversation with the West Emperor. Perhaps it was because the great emperor had used Shi Qiao's physical form, so he was not so willing to face the West Emperor. Now, at this point, he needed to understand a few things. Why would this divine relic have the ability to allow others to step on the path of the emperors? The path generates heaven, earth, and all other matter. It gave birth to the universe, and is responsible for its operation. The West Emperor looked solemn as he looked up into the sky. He continued, "That is, everything in the world is born of the path, and this path is referring to the heavenly path. The universe is operating with the will of the heavenly path. In the era before the collapse of the heavenly path, cultivators cultivate to comprehend the rules of heaven and earth until they realize the order of the great path, achieving divine power. Then, They were baptized by the divine tribulation, which ushered in transformation, resonating with the heavenly path. Once their pursuit of perfecting the divine power is accomplished, it is time for the path to transform. The cultivators themselves transformed into a kind of great path rules, under the witness of the heavenly path, casting the body of Wei, producing infinite life force and infinite will. At this realm, it is known as the realm of the Great Emperor. After the West Emperor finished speaking, he looked at Yi Futian and asked, "Do you understand what I just said?" Yi Futian nodded. At his level of cultivation, how could he not understand what the West Emperor meant? The realm of the Great Emperor was forged by one's divine power, and it was used to control the operation of some great path order. Those who could do so were symbolic figures, and no ordinary mortals could be in this realm. Therefore, they were known as heavenly gods. What about those who defy the heavenly path? Yi Futian asked again. Those who defy the heavenly path are ruthless individuals, the West Emperor continued. They want to forge their divine powers by cutting off the path, after stepping onto the path of the emperors, because they were unwilling to bend under the heavenly path. Those who conform to the heavenly path are invincible under the emperors, even if they have not entered the imperial realm. And most who go against the heavenly path will be wiped out. And if they are lucky enough to survive, they will be disabled. They cut down the path as a way of cultivation to enter a state of selflessness and limitlessness, and then forge their paths. If they were able to achieve it, they are akin to little heavenly paths. After Yi Futian heard it, he understood it in an instant. For example, he had cultivated and created his world. If he could achieve perfection, he was the little heavenly path that he made. In his world, his will was the will of the heavenly path. He understood just how ambitious those who went against the heavenly path were. They were unwilling to live under the heavenly path, and wanted to create their micro-heavenly paths. They knew it was an unnatural act, so eventually, a battle among the gods erupted, causing the collapse of the heavenly path. Nonetheless, those who defy heaven and cut down the path seem to have paid a heavy price in the end. In the battle of the heavenly path, the gods perished, but in some sense they were successful. They had caused the collapse of the heavenly path. Yi Futian didn't know what to think of those people. Their paths were utterly different from his own, and they were far more ruthless. Yi Futian had a feeling that his discovery of his path was partly due to luck, not a creation in any meaningful sense. It seemed that there was some power guiding him, including the existence of the ancient tree of the world. Divine tribulation is a tribulation, but it is also a baptism, Yi Futian remarked as he looked up above the firmament. Yes, the West Emperor nodded. This was the case in the era before the collapse of the heavenly path. Therefore, if this piece of heaven was transformed by the heavenly path, then all subsequent tribulations were the tribulations from the former heavenly path. Therefore, it means that the path of the emperors had already been cut off, the West Emperor said. Finally, Yi Futian understood what cutting off the path of the emperors meant. The path to becoming a great emperor was subsumed under the heavenly path. The heavenly path was like the mother of all things. It was in charge of the order of the world and the running of the universe. In the era post-heavenly path, all the cultivators lost the source of orders and resorted to relying on treasures left over from the ancient times to create perfect paths, just like in ancient times. Or under the shadows of the great emperors, those great emperor characters, in some sense, were spokespeople of the heavenly path in the human world. Their paths were perfect, inheriting the order of the heavenly path. However, even if a perfect path was created, becoming an emperor was still impossible. The heavenly path collapsed, and the path of the emperors was cut off. But now, the path of the emperors appeared in front of him. Yi Futian suddenly thought of one thing. He had now created a world. If he stepped into the imperial realm, his path would be the micro-heavenly path. Could this micro-heavenly path shelter other cultivators to help them become emperors? He remembered that he once used the ancient tree of the world to protect Long Chun, and the others in their cultivation, which allowed them to forge perfect paths. This meant that his idea was entirely possible. The so-called micro-heavenly path was a kind of heavenly path. However, in his world, if he was strong enough, his path was stronger than the heavenly path itself. In some sense, his would be the great heavenly path. Other than Yi Futian, the people around them listened to the conversation between the two. They were all rather curious by what they heard, and their eyes looked toward the sky. This sky was probably also transformed by the will of the heavenly path in this corner of the sky. At this moment, they had a feeling that becoming a great emperor was no longer so out of reach. Perhaps there was a chance for them to touch it. They were not the only ones with those thoughts. The people who came here before them agreed, cultivating in different locations. There are a lot of strangers. Yi Futian turned his attention to other directions. He saw many cultivators that he had never seen before. He had seen a few people who came to the Haotian clan with Donghuang Diyuan previously, but there were a few others he had never seen before. Of course, every world had some casual cultivators, all of which were on the old monster level. If the appearance of God's continent before was not enough to attract the attention of some old monsters, then the arrival of the path of the emperors was enough to draw out all the old monsters who were cultivating and hiding. Would the dawn of the age of gods become a distinction in time? The 6 emperors did not show themselves here. Perhaps they had reached some agreement, or there were other factors. Many people looked at Yi Futian, then withdrew their gazes. This space was very quiet, and there was no fighting. But everyone knew that there was no fighting only, because now was not the time. Some cultivators looked at Donghuang Diyuan to try to gauge her attitude. However, she said nothing, just continued to cultivate quietly.